This is a live stream demonstration as well, so welcome to everybody to all of you who are here in person tonight, and also a warm welcome to everybody who's tuning in on YouTube. We're doing a live stream tonight, and we've been doing these every other week over the summer, and it's been a really cool program because this year we're working very closely with the curatorial team who's presenting a couple of wonderful exhibits which you folks may have seen here in the museum. One is called In Sparkling Company, and the other is called Fire and Vine. But tonight, I'm going to be focusing on making some objects that are on display in Sparkling Company. Before I get started, I want to introduce the team. I'll introduce myself. My name is Eric Meek. I'm a glassmaker here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And assisting tonight is Tom Ryder. Yay, Tom. Jamie Perrion and Alex Young. So it's great to have a great team. Also, from the curatorial department, Linnea Seidling is here tonight, and she'll be talking about, welcome to Linnea. She'll be talking about the objects that we're making in a greater depth. So typically as glassmakers, we're able to explain the techniques and what goes into making the objects, but we don't always go so deep into why the objects are made, and that's one of the great things that you can discover when you're looking at the collection here in the museum is the context and the history around the time and what led to these objects coming about. And the story of the pieces that we're going to do tonight is really very interesting, and we're going to be making specifically an ice cream cooler, and I have one here on the table, and we're going to be making another little dessert cup. So I thought it would be very appropriate in the middle of the summer when we were planning these earlier on in the spring, it would be very appropriate to make some cool treats. So tonight's demonstration will be focused on vessels to hold cool treats. Also want to introduce Amanda Kranz, who's here answering our live stream audiences. The live streams are great because we take questions and comments from people who are tuning in at home. Usually there's this many people again who are watching online at home, and so it's great that we have a nice audience at home watching this as well. Okay, so with that little preamble, I'm going to get started and start making, I'll let Linnea talk a little bit more about what I'm going to be doing, but I'm going to turn it over to Linnea now to explain a little bit more about the pieces that we're making tonight.
Hi, everybody. Like Eric said, my name is Linnea Seidling, and I am the curatorial assistant here at the museum. And I'm here to provide a little bit of historical context to the things that Eric is working on tonight. So first, Eric is working on a Syllabub glass, which is a piece that he was inspired by, the piece in the In Sparkling Company exhibition that is a cup made out of cut lead glass. So at the end of the 1600s in England, they perfected a new type of glass.
Yes, it does.
And it was,
Thank you, Tom.
And what's new about it was they added lead oxide to the batch, which is the chemistry that makes the glass. And so all of a sudden, this glass batch included about 30% or more of lead oxide. And so what was so special about lead oxide and lead glass? It really changed a lot about what the glass looked like and what it could do. So the biggest thing that it did was it changed the refractive index of the glass. And so what does that mean? It basically means it makes the glass sparklier. So it was a lot clearer, it was a lot brighter, it was also a lot stronger, so the British could sell it to people all over the world, and they would make it when it was shipped. And they were also able to do engravings on it and cutting, and the high refractive index was what made cutting so advantageous on this, was because it's like putting facets on a diamond. It makes the light go into the glass, it bounces around, and then it shoots back out into your eye in the form of sparkles. And so that's what's so great about cut lead glass. And so so Eric, you did some cutting of a Syllabub glass earlier, right?
I did. So again, looking at the objects in Sparkling Company, there's a beautiful dessert table up there, and there are a couple of these little dessert cups. So I made a form that was similar to that, and I cut it. We have a cold shop downstairs, so when you cut glass, you just keep this a little bit warm. So when you cut glass, you'll take a thick piece of clear glass and you'll hold it against a rotating stone which will abrade it, and you can cut that into different patterns. And this is all abstract right now, but in a minute you'll see because I'll pick it up out of the oven here. But I made the cup, I cut it, and what we're going to be doing for the demonstration tonight is just polishing it. And the way I'm going to be polishing it is to take a glass that's been ground and is matte and heating it back up until the surface becomes shiny. This will only take 5 minutes or so. But I really wanted to do this piece so we could talk about Syllabub because it's wacky stuff, and we could show you this technique about how glass becomes sparklier, and one of the ways to do that is to do this cut glass thing.
Yeah, and then what's really fascinating about cut glass is that the technique that Eric used to cut the cup is pretty much exactly what they did in the 18th century. You know, just like he said, he's using a spinning stone wheel, and you're pressing the glass against it to make the cuts into it. And after you do the cutting, like Eric said, you have to polish it. It's kind of matte, it's not sparkly yet, so you can do it in a variety of ways. You can do hand polishing, which is kind of similar to the original cutting. You're using a turning wheel with some abrasive materials to grind it down to a very fine, to a high polish. You can also dip it into a bath of acid. That was a technique done a little bit later in the 18th century. Or you can do what Eric's doing, or you can fire polish it. You can flash it in the furnace really quickly. So I think one of the biggest questions you may be having right now is, what on earth is Syllabub? And I definitely had that question too when I started working on this exhibition. So Syllabub is a dessert drink that was popular in England from the end of the 1600s until about the middle of the 1700s, and it was kind of a layered drink. So Syllabub, there are a variety of different recipes to make it, but all of them pretty much use the same ingredients. So it's some kind of alcohol, so it's usually like wine or claret or sherry, sometimes cider, sugar, and some kind of dairy, so like milk or cream. And so all of these would be added together, mixed up, and one kind of Syllabub, it was just kind of let to sit overnight, and it would kind of, if you're familiar with cooking, you know, adding dairy and acid, it curdles, it does something you typically don't want it to do. So you would let it sit overnight, and the liquid would separate, and you would have kind of a custardy foam on the top, and then more liquid drink on the bottom. And so this would be spooned into cups. And I have a slide of one kind of cup that you put Syllabub in.
Oh, stop, Linnea, you're making me hungry.
For Syllabub, I think it sounds kind of gross.
It does sound a little gross. So I also wanted to interject here that what I'm doing right now is really nothing that's been done historically. As Linnea was saying, typically lead glass, one of the benefits of lead glass is that you can polish it easily. It's a softer glass than the glass that we're using here, which is a soda lime glass. So you can literally cut it and polish it easier. I don't know if you can see though, as I hold the flame on the stem here, it's going from sort of a matte finish, and then all of a sudden, right there, it's starting to happen. Can you see how that flashed clear, right? So I'm using heat to polish, but this is kind of a dangerous operation. It's really easy to destroy a piece of glass when you're taking it from room temperature back up to 2,000 degrees. And so this really isn't something that would happen commercially at all. It's something that artists do once in a while to get different effects, but glass was never really polished the way I'm doing it tonight. I just wanted to show you the effect of a cut and polished piece of glass.
Yeah, so back to Syllabub. So the glass that I had pulled up for you, this one right here, was made for drinking Syllabub. So you can see there's this funky little spout kind of coming out of the bottom of it, and so that was so you could eat sort of the foam cream on top with a spoon, and you could sip the drink out of the side of it. But then there were some other kinds of Syllabubs. There were ones where it was sort of the same ingredients that I mentioned before, but instead of just letting it separate naturally, a cook would whisk it to create air and fluff. And so this kind, it would be whisk, and then you would sort of spoon off the foam, and you would put it in a sieve and let the liquid drip off. And then you would take that foam and whisk it again, and you would do this over and over and over until you got this really dry, super fluffy fluff. and then they would sweeten wine, adding sugar to wine, and that would go on the bottom of the glass. And then you would put this foam on top, and that was the dessert you would enjoy. And so Syllabub glasses are shaped the way that they are to help the way that the dessert is, which is the separation of the drink and then the foam on top. It has kind of a wider top than at the bottom. I have another slide showing you a couple other examples of Syllabub glasses. So this is the one that Eric was inspired by that he was working on. And then here are two others, and you can see all of them kind of are a little bit of a trumpet shape. And so that wider top sort of helps the foam from collapsing down into the drink. So you do have these two distinct layers. So that's what Syllabub is.
So that piece, now that we fire polished it up at 2,000 degrees, everything we make has to go in a cooling oven. It'll sit in there and then cool down to room temperature again overnight. It takes about 10 hours to cool off completely. So that's Syllabub. It was fun hearing about Syllabub. I guess, yeah, back then that sounded like a good thing.
Syllabub actually faded out of popularity because of
the ice cream.
And the popularity of ice cream. So in the middle of the 1700s, it really changed orders. So now we're going to talk about ice cream.
That's right. So really what made me think about doing these demonstrations tonight was this piece here. So again, this piece you can actually see up in the Sparkling Company exhibit. This is one of the practice pieces I did the other night, and spoiler alert, this is actual ice and actual ice cream in here. So because I got to make one, we couldn't take the one that was 300 or 400 years old and try it out, but this one we can. So we actually have ice cream in there. So I'm going to be making this piece tonight in 3 parts, and I sort of broke it down on the whiteboard over here where you can see there's the bucket on the bottom, there's the ice cream container, and then there's a lid which will also contain ice. So I'm going to be making this in 3 parts. We'll start from the bottom and work our way towards the top, and we'll see how it comes together. It's always fiddly when you have a bunch of different parts and they have to fit together. So I did a drawing to scale here, and I'm going to be using calipers to make sure that it all fits together, which isn't always the case. We don't always use calipers, but when you're making something like this that fits together, it's kind of a necessity. So I'm going to get started on that. And again, I'll turn it over to Jamie Perry, and also will be chiming in tonight when I'm more focused on the glass blowing and helping out with the narration.
So I think I'll say a few words about dessert and sugar in general in the 18th century, and then I will give it over to Jamie. You can focus on the glass blowing for a little bit. So in the 1700s, sugar was becoming a bit more readily available to the British elite. And why was this happening? Why was it more available? And it was more available because of sugar plantations that the British were running in the Caribbean. The British were kidnapping and trafficking slaves from Africa and bringing them over to the Caribbean to work on these plantations, more specifically in Jamaica. Jamaica was actually Britain's most prosperous, most money-making colony that they had because of these sugar plantations. Enslaved people on this island outnumbered the colonists 10 to 1. So, those numbers really show us, what that colony was, why they had it and what it was doing for the British economy. So because of the availability of sugar, dessert was becoming a very, key part to elite dining back in England. And so the dessert course was becoming very important. And so with more sugar being available, the cooks of these elite families were inventing new desserts and drinks that they were making with the sugar. That they were eating it in forms of, cookies, biscuits, cakes, custards, in liquor, and also, putting sugar in your tea. And so with these new invented food types, you had to create vessels to put it in. So a lot of these forms that we have here on we recreated a dessert table in our exhibition. I have a photo of that from upstairs in our gallery. We created a dessert table from a party, from an elite English party.
Thank you.
And it depicts all of these different sweet treats that they would have eaten, and but a little more interesting in our exhibition, because we are a glass museum, we actually worked with a couple of our colleagues here at the museum who are flame workers, and all of the desserts that you see filling all of these vessels are actually made out of glass. They did, Eric Goldschmidt and Caitlin Hyde did amazing research in 18th century menus and recipes to find out, what people were eating back then. So we made period accurate desserts and cookies and, candied orange peel and violet petals, lots of really interesting things that we don't really see a lot today anymore. Yeah, I think that's about it. Let's pay attention to Eric for a little bit longer, and then when we get to the next step, I can talk a little more specifically about ice cream.
So Linnea, do you know, is ice cream from this era, or did you do ice cream research as well?
I did a lot of research on ice cream this past week, definitely. No, ice cream did not originate in the 18th century. We're actually not sure. Historians have not identified, where ice cream came from exactly. It's pretty unknown. I know there's sort of mythology that Marco Polo brought it from China to Italy, but that didn't actually happen. Ice cream kind of turned into what we would recognize it as, something that has cream and sugar and, eggs in it, that's been whisked. And so what we would recognize, it kind of took form in the 18th century. And before that, it was probably a bit more watery. They usually called it water ice. It was a bit more common before then.
Oops. Thanks, Alex. I was thinking about the ice too. So I have our ice cream cooler here, filled with ice here, and even imagining, just acknowledging that back then having ice in the summer wasn't necessarily a simple thing, right?
Yes, absolutely. That was one of the reasons that ice cream was only, a treat that was eaten by the elite at this time. Not just because the ingredients were expensive, but because you had to have the means to have something called an ice cellar. So an ice cellar is a technology that actually dates back almost 4,000 years ago to ancient Mesopotamia in modern-day Iraq. And an ice cellar ranges from, a simple hole in the ground to, a freestanding building. And so what it is that in pretty much everywhere in the world did this. So anywhere where it got cold enough in the wintertime for it to snow and for it to freeze, they would fill these pits or these rooms with snow or with ice that they would cut out of frozen rivers or lakes. So they would fill these pits or rooms, and then they would either, cover them up with natural insulating materials like turf and hay, or they would have a building on top of it, and then you would hope that the insulation from the ground and from what they put on top would keep the ice and snow from melting until you wanted to, access it in the warmer months to cool your drinks and make frozen treats.
I'm going to bury that caliper. So the ice bucket part on this is about 7 inches in diameter, and it's going to be about 6 inches tall when we're done. The diameter looks pretty good. I'm just going to flatten out the bottom now. Alex, I think we'll be all right with that door closed. We'll see. I think we'll be all right with that door closed. That's a little tight. Yeah, you were right. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, please. Awesome. Thanks, Tom. We'll straighten up that bottom edge a little bit. And then this sits on 3 little feet. You kind of can't see it because I have it on that towel over there, but this sits on 3 little feet. And funny enough, in the original, they're cube-shaped. And my modern mind immediately thinks, well, that's because they're the shape of ice cubes. But you know what? They probably didn't have ice cube makers back then, so who knows why they made them square. All right, let's go ahead with those feet. Alex, just bring me a finger or glass over. You can marble it a little bit.
Call this step bit work. Eric has set up the sort of central form, and he's allowed that part of the glass to become colder. The colder the glass is, the more rigid it's going to be. And so he's able to have bits of glass brought over and added to that central form, and he'll be able to manipulate and shape that newly added bit without distorting the main shape. And we can see visually that glow to the glass that kind of lets us know that newly added bit is where the heat is in the glass. The rest of the form, it's still pretty warm. It's well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's cool enough that it's not going to move around and change shape on Eric while he adds these 3 bits that will become the little ice cube feet for our ice cream mold.
One of the things that I am absolutely the worst at as a glass maker is getting things properly spaced in thirds. So this has 3 feet on them. And I'm going to ask Tom to help eyeball this as we put it on here. Why don't you marble that just a little bit narrower at the front? That's fine. Thanks, Alex. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah.
Flip?
Yeah, on their top side there, yeah.
Furnace blown glass
Pretty
really
good.
is a team sport, as we say. One glass maker can make a piece by themselves. It just really limits what you can do, and especially when you're going to start to work with bit work, adding various parts to pieces, having an assistant, if not one, but a second one around as well, is always going to be helpful in the hot shop. Working on your own really limits things for you. Also, it's a lot more fun to hang out with your friends and make glass.
The worst part about this camera view is everybody who's watching this can see how far off I am. They're a little far apart. They should have been closer, but I think it'll still stand up. We'll just try to push that over closer to the other one a little bit.
When we do add bit work to a piece, pretty much you want to get most of your sculpting done right when you add it, but after that first overall reheat, there is a little bit of wiggle room, and so that's why Eric was trying to move that second bit over just a little bit.
You can go ahead and make a punny, Tom.
Is that a counterweight or like 3/4?
A little counterweight would be fine, or a counterweight. Not too bad. It's not going to fall over, so that's good. Okay, so when you're making a piece of glass by hand, halfway through the process, we flip it around. So Tom's preparing a punty for me. Jamie, you might have just said this. Did you just say this whole part?
Not yet. No.
About puntying? Okay.
You've got the mic. Go ahead.
And we're going to stick that right in the center of the bottom here. And then I'll be able to work on opening up the top to finish this off.
Temperature control is really key in glass making. It's how we get the glass to move the way we want it or to inflate the way that we want it to. And for our transfer process, it's really important. The bottom of the piece and the iron that Tom has prepared, which is called a putty, they need to be warm enough that they stick together, but not too warm because we're going to want to break this putty free from the bottom at the end of the process. The constriction line right off the end of the pipe that Eric created, that part of the piece needs to be cold enough that we can create thermal shock in our glass to break it free. And we'll be able to do this with a drop of water or maybe just cold contact from one of our hand tools. The type of glass that we work with is vulnerable to cracking and breaking due to this drastic temperature change around about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So setting it up just right, applying that drop of water to send the temperature downward, and a leg tap to the iron. And we can break the piece free. And then of course on the screen, you can see inside of our reheating furnace, and you can see that connection where we just separated the piece from the pipe. This will be a pretty long repeat because we are waiting for the glass to warm back up to a workable temperature, which is closer to around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're going from around 1,000 to up to 2,000. And while Eric focuses the heat on the front of this form, you'll see he puts the whole piece in the furnace. And this is all to help maintain the temperature of the entire piece. Our punny connection, the lower part of our bowl, our little ice cube feet, everything has to stay up over that threshold for thermal shock, or it will crack and break just from being out in the open air.
Hey, Linnea, you want to show them the top of the bucket over there? So what I'm setting up right now on the top of this, it's of the bottom part, the folded lip. There you go. So up on the rim of that, it's a double thickness. It's a folded lip because it's amazing. They were very practical back then, and they didn't want to chip the lip of this, so they actually made the rim of this piece a double thickness by folding it over, and that just helps to strengthen a little bit. So I'm going to work on getting a nice fold on the top of this. I'll just check how much material I have to take off here to get the right height. So this is my total height. So I'm going to have to trim a little bit of that off, and then I'll flip the rim over to get that nice double thickness rim so it's strong. So we'll pull it a little bit to stretch it and then trim it next.
So I mentioned that temperature control in glass making is really important, and for doing something like folding the lip over on itself, it's always really important. But Eric's going to set up the heat just right so that he's going to be able to roll that lip over onto itself, and it will adhere because hot glass will stick to other hot glass really
I'll be
easily.
right, Tom.
But if he heats the shoulders of this bowl too much, it'll actually kind of start to cave in on itself. So managing the heat and getting the piece hot right where he wants to roll that lip over is really important. He might just use our reheating furnace to get that heat. He could also choose to use one of our torches to really localize that heat and warm the piece up in a specific area.
Oops, wrong caliper. We'll just set that over there. Okay.
Because these three components are all going to fit inside of each other, we really have to work hard to make sure that we have just the right measurements, and that's why he's going to work so closely with the calipers as he sets up these shapes. So the two torches that he has behind him at the bench there, they are really helpful in getting control over those temperatures. The one that's going, we call that a fluffy torch. And that's a lower temperature point than the smaller one that he may or may not use to put a lot of heat into the lip of this piece. But that is a super hot torch that really allows us to specifically pinpoint where we've got a lot of temperature in the glass.
Oops.
So it looks like we didn't use the torches and we relied just on the heat from the reheating furnace. You can see that he was able to just pull back the lip of the piece, and then he's using the blades of those hand tools, they're called jacks by the way, to make sure that he has contact all the way around that lip. We have a pretty limited working time with our glass at the bench. We spend probably more time at the reheating furnace than we'll do shaping
on the rim,
glass
Tom.
at the bench. And because of that, there's a lot of communication on the team. Eric knows the step that he's going to take right after this heat, so we might set out the specific tools that he needs, or he'll let his assistants, like Tom, know what step's going to be next so that they can successfully work through that process in that extremely limited working time we have with the glass.
Okay, so I really wanted to focus the heat up on the rim of this so I could get a nice fold. Now I'm working the heat down a little lower in the bucket so we get straight walls again. We'll continue to open this up, and then I'll bring it back straight with the paper here. There we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and start those handles. This has two handles on it. Alex, yeah, she has some tweezers there. on the cooler there.
Oh, yeah. Got it.
Okay, go ahead and touch the rim, Tom. Great, stop. Do you mind doing a ID with those calipers now? Well, yeah. Taper the front of that a little narrower, Alex. I did do a drawing, but I just want to make sure Tom checks the inside diameter so that that interior ice cream holder fits. Okay, let me get a flash here. Yep.
A flash, by the way, if we haven't mentioned, it is a short overall heat to help maintain the temperature of the piece. We're about to do some more bit work. Alex has prepared a Roman handle bit, and Eric's going to apply 2 of these to the piece to make the handles on the sides of the bowl.
Alex, take your time and get that nice and hot. That really can't be too hot.
So the way we set up a Roman style handle, you might have seen Alex, and she's going to do
Great.
it twice,
Straight up.
so I'll stop and explain it better as it's happening. But to apply a handle, hot glass sticks to the other hot glass without a problem. You can see that he's able to stretch that material up. That glass is still hot and moving around, and that's why he immediately turns. And then he reaches up, grabs a hold of that glass, rolls it over, not onto itself, but just to create that shape, and then touches it down on the body of the piece. Again, as long as the piece itself is warm enough, that handle will attach. After this reheat, he'll be able to further define the shape. Running a tool on the inside of that handle, that glass will still stretch, and he can define the arc. That cold tool is cooling the inside of that handle, helping to freeze that glass in place. The only thing trickier than that first handle, folks, is of course the second one. So Eric relies on Alex's skill as a glass maker to create a matching bit. So the same amount of glass, the same heat and shape. And also, as she reheats it, to deliver it at the same temperature as well. I did miss her creating the Roman handle, but you saw she allowed the glass to lay flat on the table. So this handle has one flat side, and then one side with texture that she created with the hand tools called tweezers. Little creases on one side of the handle. And once again, our camera would give everything away if these weren't
Nope,
right
you're good.
across from each
Those are
other,
nice,
but
thank
they
you.
are. That fresh handle, the one we just added, that's going to have a little bit of movement to it, so Eric will take this opportunity to make sure it matches the other handle. So he'll stretch it out a little bit and try to create the same arc. You have to work quickly with bit work. After that heat, it's no longer going to move around independently of the bowl itself. And so it would be pretty tricky to heat up just that handle enough to change the shape after that. Here we're just managing the temperature of that punchy connection. The same thermal shock that we used to separate this bubble from the blowpipe earlier on, we'll use that again to separate the whole piece from our punty iron. Just a little bit of water at that connection point will create thermal stress or fractures in that punty, and then a light tap to the iron, the punty will break free from the bottom of the form, and we'll place it inside of our slow cooling oven or annealer.
Good, Tom.
Alongside of our little cup, dessert cup. This is our more fire polishing, just like we used for the dessert cup, to be able to make sure we don't have any sharp edges at that honey connection point.
Okay, so that's the bucket. You have 2 more parts to do. The part that actually is holding the ice cream here is just kind of a top hat shape. That'll go pretty quickly here. And then Tom, you want to do that inside diameter to an outside diameter now.
So while Eric is working on the bowl liner of the ice cream cooler, I can tell you a little bit more about ice cream in the 18th century. So we already talked a little bit, what you need for ice cream, what made ice cream so expensive, and it was, the sugar and the need to have an ice cream cellar so that you could have ice, not in the winter. So ice cream, the earliest evidence that we have that ice cream came to England was at the end of the 1700s. So it was end of the 1600s, excuse me. So in about 1671, we have evidence that that ice cream was served in the court of King Charles II. We think that he attained a taste for ice cream while he was in exile in France, and so he stayed in the court of France with the royal family and where they served ice cream, and we think that he brought it back with him to England and asked his cooks to make it there. So quite a bit after that, so in the early 1700s, that's when ice cream kind of became a bit more, recipes for ice cream started showing up in recipe books that we still have. One of the earliest recipes was from 1718. It was in a cookbook that was written by a woman named Mary Eales, and she used to be the confectioner for Queen Anne. And in this recipe, it's quite vague actually. She just calls for cream, either sweetened or unsweetened, and pretty much any fruit that you want. It's 2 ingredients. It's not a lot. And then she describes how she makes it, the technique to make ice cream. And so I actually have a very cute picture slide that sort of illustrates how ice cream is made in the 1700s. And again, it's not that different than how we do it. So I have this illustration from a cookbook that was the first cookbook that was dedicated to ice cream and frozen desserts, the art of making ice cream. And we have these, so it illustrates these little cupids or little putti making and serving ice cream. So in these recipes, it calls for, so you make your ice cream, the cream mixture, the ice cream batter, and you put it into these little tin containers. Sometimes they were boxes, sometimes they were cylinders, like in this illustration. And you would then put the containers with your ice cream batter into barrels filled with ice that's been mixed with salt to make it colder than if it were just ice. And in Mary Eales' recipe, she just sort of leaves the containers in there. But if you've ever made ice cream before, you really need to keep the batter moving, or ice crystals develop and it gets kind of crunchy and gritty, which isn't terribly yummy. So other recipes from this time do recommend that every now and then you take out the container and you stir it around, you whisk it up so that you prevent ice crystals, and you also incorporate air into your ice cream, which gives it a creamier flavor. So I love this little illustration of little Cupid. So you can see on the front, on the right, he's dipping the containers into the barrels, and on the left, he's scooping it out, and they're dispensing it into these cute little, they actually look quite like Syllabub cups, these little 2-handled glass cups. And I bet you're all wondering, what kind of flavors of ice cream they were eating at this time. And some of them are things that are pretty normal to us, and some of them were a little unusual. So I think the more unusual flavors that I came across were cheese-based, so like Parmesan cheese ice cream I saw. I also saw a lot of ice creams flavored with flowers, so like violet and rose and hyacinth. Those were really interesting. But then there were a lot of flavors that are pretty typical to us today, chocolate, flavors based on nuts, so pistachio, and then fruits like lemon and strawberry and cranberry was one. It's a little more unusual. So not too different. But then, so the British also, they were the ones who invented this form of the ice cream cooler. They actually called them ice pails or glacières, which from the French. And so they developed this form. Eric's already described it for you. It's made out of 3 pieces. You have the pail, and then the liner, and then the top. And like we have here on the Marver, you would fill the pail with ice. Sometimes you'd put salt in it too if you were really worried about it melting. And then the ice cream would go in the bowl. And then this lid is quite unusual. It has these really tall walls on the side of it so that you could put more ice in it so it was cooled on both sides. So this form was meant to make sure the ice cream wouldn't melt going from the kitchen to the table, and also so that it would look beautiful on your table or on your dessert table. And so I have an illustration of both so this is the pail that Eric is reproducing that is in our exhibition in Sparkling Company in our galleries upstairs. And it's pretty remarkable. It was made in the 1760s likely. But ice pails were actually typically made out of ceramic. So here's an image of one. It's pretty much the same form, as you can see. And this one was made in France by the famed Sèvres manufactory. And this one is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York City.
How fun is that? You can't even see the ice in that one.
What?
The ceramic one, how fun is that? You can't even see the ice.
Yeah, the ceramic was much more common, but I would argue that the glass was a better material for this because, of course, you can see inside, which is, not just fun and beautiful, but it's also a bit more functional. You can see if your ice is all melted. You can see if there's still ice cream left in there. So I would argue that glass was the better material.
We're biased here at the Corning Museum of Glass. I always say to guests, if there's one thing that you leave this place with the impression of, it's just how incredibly versatile this material has been, just how many different ways people have used it in utility and art and in science and technology. And sometimes they come together in something like this, where it's functional and beautiful and practical and clever all at once. Okay, so this, I've purposely left quite a lot of extra on the top so I can make sure I get it down to the right size. Tom's given me the inside diameter of the bucket, so I know this will sit down in it. And we also have the height, so I know that this won't touch down on the bottom, that there's plenty of room for the ice below the ice cream. So I have my two critical measurements, and now I'm going to work on adjusting at the top here. And I know I have quite a bit of material to take off, so I'm going to get this a little narrower, which will make it easier to cut. So this is just the newspaper. Narrow that down. I'll do another heat, and then I'll be able to get in there and cut that to get down to the right height. Amanda, how are our friends online? Good. Ooh, lots of ice cream fans. Linnea was talking about where kings discovered ice cream. I know my children discovered ice cream at the Hokey Pokey here in Corning. All right, so we'll cut quite a bit of that off to get it down so it's not too tall. There we go.
In case anybody is wondering, cutting through glass is actually pretty easy as long
Tell
as
me
you
at
have
the
the right
top
temperature.
with the paddle.
Remember, temperature is always key. But if the glass is hot enough that you can cut through it successfully, it's probably like cutting through Play-Doh with a pair of scissors, even the little plastic ones that come with a Play-Doh set. There's really not too much resistance. If there is, then you're just breaking glass and ruining the nice sharp edge of your shears. So you probably want to take a repeat before you make that next cut.
Okay, go ahead. All right, thank you. Okay. looking good here.
So Eric, you brought up one of our lovely local ice cream shops, Hokey Pokey. Did you know that Hokey Pokey actually has a glassy story?
They have a what?
It has a glassy story, that word, in ice cream, used in ice cream.
No, really?
So I did not recently research this. I'm remembering this from a couple years ago, so fingers crossed I remember everything properly. So before the ice cream cone, little glass, you would get your ice cream at a little cart, and you would get it in a little glass cup, and you would just kind of stand there and eat it, and then you would give it back when you were done. And I'm almost positive that those glass vessels were actually called Hokey Pokeys.
Oh my God, I love having a curator here.
And this is much, of course, this was not in the 18th century. And then more recently, Hokey Pokey is actually a flavor of ice cream that unfortunately they do not offer at our ice cream shop, Hokey Pokey. And it is one of the most popular flavors in New Zealand. And the reason I know this is because it's one of my favorite ice cream flavors. And it is ice cream that has, I think it's just a vanilla base, but then it has honeycomb candy mixed into it. And I don't know if you've ever made honeycomb candy at home. It's basically caramel, and then you put baking soda in it, and it makes the kind of explode with bubbles. And so then you pour it onto a sheet, and so there are all these bubbles in it, so it kind of looks like honeycomb. That's why it's called honeycomb. And so that's what Hokey Pokey ice cream flavor is. It's one of my favorites. My husband is an ice cream, likes to make ice cream at home, and so he makes it for me sometimes.
Baking soda actually does that to glass as well. There's lots of different ways that we can put bubbles into our glass. Sometimes it happens naturally in the meltdown of the furnace. We can also use molds to create uniform indentations on a bubble, collect molten glass over it, and we would have a uniform bubble pattern. But we can also take a bucket of water, throw some baking soda in it, churn it up, and then dunk a bubble into that bucket of water, and then go back to the furnace and gather over it. And there's a reaction between the layers of glass that creates a storm of bubbles between the two layers of glass. And then you can move ahead and make whatever vessel you intended to make, maybe a small dish to eat ice cream out of, and it'll have that storm of bubbles trapped between the layers of glass.
It's perfect. Yep. So this has been sitting here an hour.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, and
Especially
it's
in a hot shop.
just right. It's a little soft on the edges. Can you get down in there, Matt? Yeah, good. It's a little soft on the edges, but it's perfect dipping temperature. There we go. How wonderful is that? It works.
Excellent.
Believe it or not, folks, this is what makes the Corning Museum of Glass special, right? That we have precious objects and then we can play around making them and doing silly things like this, testing out 17th century ice cream coolers. This is Wegmans ice cream.
Have you ever had Perry's ice cream? The flavor is called Panda Paws.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the little chocolate peanut butter cups mixed in the vanilla fudge ice cream. If you haven't had that one, I would try it while you're in the area. It's called Panda Paws.
It works, folks. Okay, so now we're going to work on making the lid.
Would you wager that this is the trickiest part? Tom agrees. I would say it's the trickiest part, not only because of the shape, but because it has to fit perfectly inside of the ice cream holder section. And you can see there's actually a dip here in the bowl that holds more of the ice for us to help keep our ice cream nice and cold.
Yeah, this is definitely the tricky one because of the fold that sits on top of there. And really, the thing you don't maybe realize when you're starting to blow glass, but you know when you've been blowing glass for many years, you slowly come to realize is that the success of a piece like that is determined when you gather the glass out of the furnace, because this core bubble, if it's a little bit crooked, when you're doing something like that, it really, really makes it difficult. And to get this core bubble straight, you have to make a nice even gather. You have to block it up just so, and everything just has to go right. This went really well. So this bubble is nice and straight. It'll give me it'll make my job in forming that folded lip a whole lot easier. Linnea, did you show the lid portion of what we got going on here? So the different parts of that are, you can point at the rim, the folded out rim, yep, and then we'll open up the top, and then the last part will be to put that finial on with the little loop. I actually forgot to make one of those loops. Maybe there are some in the oven, but Tom, maybe while I'm setting this up, you and Alex could make one of those loops for the folks to see. And I'm going to get my measurement over here.
Oh, you did it on the tag?
Yeah, just on the handle of the tag, wrap it around.
So when we're collecting the glass from the furnace, this here is our melting furnace. It's sitting at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. And at that temperature, the glass inside kind of moves and flows almost like honey. And as it cools, it sets up and becomes more rigid. So that's kind of just one of the many challenges to making glass, is that you're working with a material that's in a constant state of change. After Eric creates that starter bubble, he's let it get colder so that it's rigid enough to support the weight and the heat of a second gather of glass from our melting furnace. Every time we go back to the melting furnace, we can gather exponentially more glass, simply because we're covering over more surface area. So we start with the pipe and we cover over that to create our starter bubble. And once that's blown out, we have more area to cover over, and we're able to get quite a significant amount of glass on that second gather.
Like optics, right?
Yep. Oh, first, Tom, I should tell you what you're making. So Tom's just pre-making a little loop that goes on the finial of the lid here. I do have a couple of them made and setting aside in a warm place called the garage, so we can bring those out here in a little bit.
So every tool that we touch to the glass is going to draw some of the temperature out it as we're working. As Eric was using that scoop tool to shape the second gather of glass, the core bubble starts to heat up because it's wrapped in that fresh gather. The exterior is being cooled down slowly through the use of that tool, and he's trying to even out the temperature throughout all of that material so that when he starts to inflate the glass, it inflates evenly. The air that we put into the pipe is always going to take the path of least resistance, and that's the softest glass. That's the hottest glass. So controlling the temperature, making sure things are nice and even, that's going to give us nice even inflation in our bubble. To make the ring that Tom just made, it might have been hard to see, but he used one of our optic molds. The optic molds help us to put texture on the glass. So you can see this one here, this star pattern all the way around.
We'll drop it on like
the points travel all
like
the
a
way
foot
down
kind
into
of.
the cup. So he plunged the glass into this optic mold, and the cold metal of the mold chilled the surface of the skin of the glass in place, and so that created ridges. And after taking a heat, you watched him stretch that bit of glass out. He was also twisting. This spiraled those three-dimensional textured edges. And I think that maybe they chose to create a textured ring on the top of that piece to make sure that it didn't slip out of their fingertips when they were lifting it to get to that ice cream. So here goes our constriction line. We saw this already a couple times. That's going to be our break-off point. It's made with those hand tools that Eric was just holding called the jacks. So sometimes we call it a jack line, but it's super important. It's going to go into every piece that we create. Believe it or not, it's a step that gets forgotten when you first start working in glass. It's quite a difficult thing to get the piece off the pipe if you don't have that predetermined weak point set into the glass. So as he further inflates that shape, he's always going to go back and reinforce that line. The smaller it is, the easier it will be to guarantee that nice clean breakaway from the pipe later on. The reheating furnace, by the way, we're able to see a little bit more into the glassmaking universe here at the Corning Museum of Glass. Not because of a camera that we have that's amazing and can withstand 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, but we do have an amazing type of glass. There's a small window in the back of this furnace. It's made from glass called pure fused silica. And this type of glass was actually developed right here in Corning in the 1930s. It withstands temperatures over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit before it actually starts to become fluid and molten again. So we can place a little window in the back of our 2,000 degree furnace without a problem. And beyond that window, that's where the camera sits. The camera's got a fan on it to keep that technology cool enough so that it doesn't turn off in the middle of a demonstration. But that's how we're giving you that unique view into the glass making process because of that special and unique type of glass.
So the exterior, the fold that I'm going to do on this, I'm going to just try to do with precise overheating. I'm really heating sort of the midsection of this bubble. I'm keeping the cone on the top where it's attached to the blowpipe. I'm keeping that really cold and rigid. And I'll just basically push this back up on itself, hopefully to form that fold.
So as the glass heats up in that furnace,
Thanks,
it
Tom.
becomes more soft and fluid. Eric can pick up the rate at which he turns, and this is going to widen the form. The glass is going to stretch out a little bit. And then he's using this board to press that back to create that ring. He's careful to make sure that he doesn't push it back too far. And then he's actually going to blow air into the pipe. There's still glass below that ring across the bottom. And you can see it's going to pump out to create that sort of section where we hold the ice.
All right, I think that worked. So that'll still sit in there. The rim's wide enough to sit on the top. Okay, I'll just flatten the bottom of this a little bit and we'll punty it up. Tom, you go ahead and make a punty.
So when he pushes the glass back to create that ring, it actually traps a ring of air all the way around, so it is hollow, but it does touch back on itself, and that's the reason that it didn't all just come out when he inflated the glass. Because that glass made contact, it sort of traps that ring there in the center of our form, and only that glass across the bottom would further inflate.
Perfect.
All right, sounds like we've got our measurements just right, and we're going to move into our transfer process for this part of the piece. I believe Tom is working on the punchy. He's already got it. Oh, he's preheating the pipe. So some of you might notice this rack back here with all of our pipes and hollow irons that we're working with. Believe it or not, the metal actually has to be preheated. So I've mentioned a few times that hot glass sticks to other hot glass without a problem. The metal is preheated so that the hot glass in the furnace will stick to it. If these irons and pipes, if they're not preheated, you actually can rest the pipe on the surface of the glass and turn for a while until the metal heats up, and then the glass actually starts to stick. So Tom had to take a moment there to preheat this iron. Another drawback of gathering on a cold iron is that it's going to pull the heat out of the glass, and that's going to make it harder to maintain the right temperature for this transfer process, because we don't want our punny to be too cold or it's not going to stick to the bottom of the piece.
You know, Linnea, there may be something here. You know, we have an exhibit up right now called Fire and Vine that's about the relationship between glass and wine. Like, why not do fire and ice? You know, we have this. I've also seen, like you were saying, the little Hokey Pokeys. I've also heard them called penny licks, where you could pay a penny and get a little dish of ice or a tiny little scoop of ice cream in a reusable glass container before they were using ice cream cones.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Isn't it? The ice cream store up at Watkins Glen has a collection of the little glass penny lick containers.
We'll have to go check that out.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now we got to trim some of the glass. We have to trim a lot of the glass off of the top of this because the rim on the top, on the example I have out there, is too tall. If you look at the original, I want to trim that down quite a bit. it's so much fun working at the museum here and just being able to go and look at the historical objects in the collection and be inspired by them. I mean, there's no better collection of glass in the world, and to have such wonderful making facilities and teaching facilities right here. There's a studio right across the parking lot where we do our Make Your Own Glass workshop, but it's also renowned for over 20 years of instructors, renowned instructors coming from around the world to teach intensive workshops. And that's actually the reason I live in Corning, is because I used to come to Corning all the time to take classes at the studio. And one of the things that makes taking classes there so special is just that you have this amazing collection. And it's amazing and inspiring, but it's incredibly humbling to see the finesse and abilities of glassmakers from centuries and centuries ago. Just when you think you're getting good, or you think you've discovered some new technique in glassmaking, you just have to walk in our museum, and I'm pretty much guarantee you can find someone else who did it about 500 years before you even thought of it. Okay, so again, I'm going to trim this with the shears, and you know, if it's the diameter of a paint bucket, it's really difficult to trim it. If it's the diameter of a paper towel tube, it's really easy to trim. So I'm going to try to get it somewhere in between. I'm going to try to squeeze this down as much as I can, reduce the diameter so it's easier to trim down lower. So just use that paper a little bit to try to get that diameter down. I haven't blown glass a lot lately, so I'm doing a really good job of knocking tools on the floor in this demonstration.
Another thing that's really great about working at the Corning Museum of Glass, as you do go through the collections and kind of check out the different types of glass that have been made over the centuries, you'll always get a glassmaker that comes back with a photograph from the ancient glass gallery, and then we all spend the rest of the day trying to figure out how it was made. And because we're able to have access to the glass and other glassmakers who have years of experience, you know, I've been working with glass for about 16 years, Eric for closer to 30, so he's going to know a few more things than I do. And we kind of challenge each other to figure out how did they do that, and especially how did they do that, you know, hundreds of years ago.
And that's a really great resource for us in the curatorial department, that, you know, we have these amazing collection objects, but, you know, most of us, we're not glassmakers as well, and so we have this amazing resource to, you know, go talk to them and say, how do you
doesn't need to be a lot of glass, Alex.
It can tell you about it, or lucky,
it doesn't need to be a ton
tonight,
of glass. You don't have to try to gather all you can. All right, Tom, go ahead.
A lot of the techniques that we use today in glassmaking are the same as they were at the very beginning of glassmaking. Some of the biggest changes that we have is kind of the technology, of course, or the way we heat the glass. Originally, they were able to attain these heats with a wood-fired furnace, and eventually coal was used, and today we have natural gas and forced air that fires this entire hot shop. We also have electric hot shops here at the Corning Museum of Glass. So upstairs in our Innovation Center, we have an electric melting furnace, an electric reheating unit, and so that's kind of the biggest changes in glass, is how we're keeping this material molten.
Okay,
but a lot of the techniques and tools that we use are the same almost as they've always been.
Okay, awesome, thanks. We were talking about collaborating with other glassmakers and instructors and artists. It's also been just so much fun. And this has sort of developed in my career at the museum in the last 5 or 10 years, and that is working with the curators more and more, because it's just, you know, we kind of get, glassmakers get in their own heads about technique, and it's just great to have have the curators with their perspective, and then also the historical context of when it was made and who made it, and what sort of technology they were using at the time. Really helps us understand the object so much better. And hopefully what we know about glassmaking can help inform what they do as well. That's great, Alex. Just get it nice and hot. Yep. Give it just a light puff in the mold, and then you can hand it to me right out of the mold, okay? Just don't stand there too long and lose too much of the heat.
So Alex is using that same optic mold that Tom
Good.
used to create the ridges.
I'm going to shape it.
Yeah,
There you go. You can take that for a flash.
On a bubble. So we plunged that bubble into the optic mold. Alex inflated the glass. It filled all the available space, excuse me. But now we have a textured bubble. And you can't see it because of the ice. Maybe we can see it here in our empty one, but this is going to be the
One more
post
flash.
that ring sits upon. Temperature and timing are always key with glass making, so there's a lot of communication here going on between Eric and Alex to make sure the timing is
Okay,
just
bring it
right.
over. There you go. Get that nice and hot. No, these are fine.
So we're going to use gravity to apply this bit. Alex is getting this bit nice and warm. She's going to keep turning. Eric's going to be able to stop that turn by reaching up and grabbing a hold of the iron.
You won't
with
need to
that
blow it.
hand
You can just
tool.
let it drop,
You're
okay?
going to see gravity take over the glass. It will drop,
That's fine. Let it go.
and then Eric will cut it free.
Try to
after
get somewhere
stretching
near
it
the
to
center.
the right height.
Perfect.
Now that newly added bit is still hot enough that it's moving around. Eric immediately started turning. You might have seen it kick off.
You guys
to the
want to load
left
up
or the right
one of the
hand.
rings?
But he'll be able to get it running on center, probably with a hand tool, but also that nice even turn. If he didn't turn, that piece, he'd cut it free and it would just lay down on the side of the piece. So as glassmakers, we're always working with and against gravity's pull on the glass. Sounds like we're getting ready with some of our pre-made pieces. They're in a unit called a garage because we can park the glass in there at the safe temperature where it's not going to be so hot that it's moving around and it won't be so cold that it will start to crack and break on us. And I believe what we have pre-made are the rings that will attach to the top of the piece. And the way we can do this is either using that torch, we can spot heat the glass.
No, do a hot bit.
Or we can
Yep.
add some more material and something we call it a glue bit. It'll be just a small little bit of glass
Just let me know when you're ready.
that literally acts as glue to attach the two parts. So the garage does have two sides. We move the piece over to the hot side of the garage and warm it up a bit before we draw it out of that unit. And then we might take one of those little flash sheets in this furnace behind me. It's a second reheating chamber, so it's the same as the one in front of Eric.
Yep,
Just to
sounds
make
good.
sure that the temperature doesn't drop too quickly before we bring it over to attach it to the piece.
So right now I'm just kind of cruising at a temperature here where the glass is warm enough that it's not susceptible to cracking, but it's cool enough it's not going to move around too much. So this is in the 12 or 1300 degree range. And then we're going to put it on with what we call a glue bit. It's not glue, it's hot glass, but we just use it to create a nice hot tacky patch for this loop.
We'll
It's coming
attach
right
this
over.
glue bit here
Bring it right over, Alex.
using a technique called casting on and then casting off, and you just watched it. But that would be a way that early glass makers would have added bits of glass
That's
to their
fine.
pieces before the invention of shears or ways to cut through the glass. That glue bit is the hottest, so that's where all the flex is. He's able to adjust that and center the ring up before that glue bit cools down and it's no longer moving around.
Okay.
Wearing gloves or the fork?
Yeah, gloves are fine.
So as soon as Eric's happy with this piece and the temperature is evened out, we'll place this piece away in the same oven that we've been putting all the other parts. I'm not sure if we discussed them yet. They're called annealers. The process is called annealing, but it's a slow cooling cycle, bringing the glass from just below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit down to room temperature. The thicker the glass is, the longer that cycle is going to take. So this piece, I think it would be all right with about 10 hours of cooling. But a solid softball-sized paperweight, you'd want to wait more like 24 hours to let that cool down properly. So the thicker the glass is, the longer it's going to take to cool it down.
Okay, so last stop here. We'll just get this off. As I'm doing this, I'm going to thank again assistants here, Tom Ryder and Alex Young. Thank you guys so much for your help tonight. Linnea, with all the wonderful information that she shared with us, and Amanda, and of course Jamie talking. Oh, the top of that came off a little bit, but that's okay. We got another one. There we go. So thanks to the team. How about a big round of applause for the team? A huge thank you to the inventor of ice cream and enjoying that on. And we also want to make sure we introduce Fred here. Fred is a cactus that Alex brought in that only blooms every couple of years, and it decided today that it would bloom. So it's great to have a nice little flower in the shop today too. So everybody, thank you so much for coming. If you have questions, feel free to come on down after the show. I'd be happy to answer questions or talk about this, or if you want a dish of ice cream, I'll give you a dish of ice cream too. But thank you for spending time with us today. Hope you enjoyed the demonstration, and thanks for coming to the museum. And everybody online, thank you guys for tuning in tonight. We really appreciate it.